What's going on, guys? My name is Diggy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have a NFL mock draft for you guys using the Draft Network's 2020 mock draft machine. I have my mock draft here that I'm going to be referencing throughout the rest of the video, but I just wanted to preface really quickly that a lot can still change with free agency, trades, all that kind of stuff. So this is just my first mock draft of many, but I wanted to see what your opinions were of it, what you thought of how I was mocking players and where they would go, their fits with their respective teams. So I'm curious what you guys think about it. Make sure you leave a like, make sure you subscribe and comment. I'd love to see what you guys think about the upcoming draft, who's going to fall where, and just general theories about free agency and stuff like that. But we're going to get into the video here. I'm going to be drafting only the first round, so I'm going to select all these teams here, and I just want to do a normal draft with the predictive board. Now, as I don't know if I've mentioned this already, but I don't know how updated this site actually is. Obviously, since mock drafts have been starting to come out throughout the season, the draft orders changed, as well as the player order. Guys have been rising up or falling depending on their performance lately. So, it's as good as it's going to get for the most part. So I just want to make it clear that if there's a guy who you think is a potential first rounder who you don't see within the first 32, odds are the site isn't, updated yet, or, I just don't think that they're a first round talent, or maybe I do, but it's just they don't have a fit on a particular team that's picking in the first round for where they're mocked to go. So we're going to get into it here. First team up, obviously the worst team in the league, the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, obviously they still have the red rifle. However, throughout the season, it was pretty obvious that his actual play is, starting to fall a little, which is to be expected. He's upwards of 30 years old now. He's been in this franchise for as long as I can personally remember. And it just hasn't worked out. They haven't had a lot of postseason success. They've always been kind of one of those teams hovering between 6-10 and 9-7. Never really making a big push in the playoffs or anything like that. So I think they take a quarterback here. I think it's fairly obvious. We don't have to spend too much time on it. It's going to be Joe Burrow from LSU, hometown Ohio kid coming back to Cincinnati. Now, there have been rumors that they really, really like what they saw from Justin Herbert. To me, it seems like the obvious selection here, in my opinion. It just makes the most amount of sense. I think as a franchise and for the fans, it's a good thing in terms of revenue and et cetera, selling Joe Burrow's persona and stuff like that. It just totally makes sense. Quarterback's the most valuable position in football. Don't let anyone tell you any differently, and I think they get their guy here. On to pick 2. Chase Young is going to be the selection here for the Washington Redskins. Now, I think that there's a very real chance that either pick 2 or pick 3 could be traded, and I'm going to get into pick 3 with the Lions in a second here, but I do genuinely believe that Chase Young is one of those guys that it's a generational type talent, very similar to the Bosa brothers, potentially even better than them from what I've seen from just his season in college, from, just his pure athletic profile. I think he's even better than they were in college. So, it's a testament to him. He's a fantastic player. Do I think the Redskins could get an absolute haul for even trading back a couple of spots? I think they would, but I don't know if you're going to ever come across a guy like Chase Young in a draft, maybe ever again. So I think he's the obvious selection here. We're just going to do a mock draft with no trades for right now. I will probably release a video at some point outlining potential trades that I could see happening, but the Lions select here at number 3. A lot of people have Jeffrey Okudah here. I do as well. I think he's a really lengthy perimeter corner. Physical on the line, but then can really close if he gets behind on a receiver. With the aging Darius Slay, it makes a lot of sense to start revamping that defense and that secondary. So I think this pick makes a lot of sense here. Giants at number 4. Obviously, at the back half of the season, all the Giants fans were assuming that they'd have the number 2 overall pick and we're going to land a fantastic edge rusher in Chase Young. However, they have fallen to 4, and I think they get their linebacker of the future here. I'm going to go Isaiah Simmons here, and the reason for that is because they do desperately need a guy who can kind of do it all. A little bit of a Swiss Army knife in their defense. He's a rangy linebacker who's got great closing speed, can play the run just as well as he can play the pass. I think he's got a lot of bursts, and I think he brings a lot of energy to a defense that desperately needs it. So, revamping that linebacking core is obviously a great idea. I do think edge is a bigger need for them, but they do have Oshane Ximines who, kind of flashed a little bit during the seasons. To get a guy like Isaiah Simmons to anchor that middle part of the defense, I think for them it's a great pick here, and it's the one that makes the most amount of sense. On to number 5, the Miami Dolphins are officially on the clock, and they have a ton of issues. They have a lot of holes, but they also do have 3 first-round picks, so they're not totally out of it. This is the moment that they've been waiting for in this whole rebuild. I think the guy that they take here is Tua Tagovailoa. Now, the reason for that is because if I were the Dolphins, I would bring back Ryan Fitzpatrick for one more year. He wasn't bad as a starter this year when he took over for Josh Rosen. And I think you just give Tua a year to recover. He'll probably miss the combine, but he will, in all likelihood, be able to perform for a pro day. So we'll see of the implications of the hip and all that stuff. But I think it's a good idea. If you're going to take a shot, definitely take it on a guy like Tua. He would, in all likelihood, be the number 1 overall pick had he not gotten hurt, even despite the unbelievable season that Joe Burrow had. I recently watched an episode of The Herd with Colin Cowherd, and he had an NFL scout on it who scouts quarterbacks, and he said that Tua Tagovailoa is the most complete, ready quarterback he has seen. It's all dependent on his health, which he's had a lot of struggles with over his time in college. So personally, I think that's the best call. Give Fitzpatrick one more year with the team. Let Tua develop in your system. Let him get healthy. Let him learn the offense and stuff like that. You saw how well it worked out with a guy like Patrick Mahomes. And then you can, get rid of Fitzpatrick the following season, whatever. Hopefully he retires at some point. Number 6 with the Chargers. So we now all know that Phillip Rivers will not be returning to the team. I think in all likelihood, he'll probably go to a Florida-based team, most likely the Buccaneers. But there have also been rumors linking him to the Patriots. However, I think the Chargers at this point are ready for their next quarterback. I don't think they're going to actively pursue anyone in free agency. Now, there were rumors that they're going after Brady, but, if Tom Brady's a free agent, you'd be stupid as a team to not even, pursue him a little bit just to see what his offers he's getting, that kind of stuff. He is Tom Brady. He is the GOAT. No, I don't think the Chargers go that direction. I think they're one of those teams who has just missed their window on relevance. You want to say Super Bowl contenders, whatever it is. But I think they've kind of missed the boat. They've got enough problems with Melvin Gordon and stuff like that. So I think quarterback is the call here. It's going to be Justin Herbert. Tall, athletic, really strong guy out of Oregon. I think he has some awareness issues and some decision-making problems, but I think overall he's the prospect, the stereotypical quarterback prospect that could potentially thrive in the NFL. So I'm not entirely surprised by the decision here. I like the pick. On to number 7, the Carolina Panthers. Now, the Carolina Panthers have an interesting decision here. I think personally this is one of the teams that could be looking to move up in the draft if they do not resolve their quarterback issue. However, their run defense was absolutely atrocious this season. They could not stop anyone from running the ball, especially after that, little bit of time when they were still winning after Cam was out and all that stuff. When it really started to crumble, you saw it in the run defense. They just couldn't stop anyone. So I think they get a guy like Derek Brown in here, really shore up the middle of that defensive line. He's a great run stopper. He's not as great at pushing the, center guards into the quarterback, really pressuring the quarterback from that standpoint. But I think he's a great, run stopper. He's a big body in the middle, can get into the trenches. And, that's the guy that they're kind of looking for. So I'm going to reference my mock draft here because personally I think after pick 2 or even 5, that's when the real draft begins because I think Joe Burrow and Chase Young are essentially a shoo-in for number 1 and 2 no matter who's picking there. And I think if the draft order were to stay at the same spot as it is today, I think 1 through 5 is a very, very realistic way that the draft will go. However, after pick 5, it starts to get a little bit dicey. Now, I, as you know, am a huge Cardinals fan. It was the first rebuild that I have on my channel. If you haven't checked it out, please go check it out. I would really appreciate it. The Cardinals are an interesting team because they desperately need to protect Kyler Murray because he got sacked and was running for his life all season. Now, you could also make the argument that could really use receiver help. They did draft Andy Isabella last year in the second round, who I thought was a great selection. However, he didn't get a lot of playing time. Guys like Hakeem Butler haven't seen the field a lot since they've been drafted. Larry Fitzgerald, obviously the legend, but he's getting old now. You're seeing glimpses of a Christian Kirk that I thought he could be. However, he's dealt with injury. So you could make the argument for offensive tackle or wide receiver here. Now, obviously, I'm not entirely going off what the website says. However, they do say here, team needs right underneath. It's all laid out for you. I kind of like referencing it. I kind of don't like referencing it. But, however, the pick here for the Cardinals, in my opinion, is going to be Jedrick Wills. He's just a super athletic offensive tackle out of Alabama, and he really rose in the last month, maybe 2 months, over guys like Tristan Wirfs out of Iowa, over guys like Mekhi Becton out of Louisville, Andrew Thomas out of Georgia. I think he's kind of the new age of offensive linemen, a little bit smaller, a little bit more compact, but very athletic. Can get the edge on a pull block or whatever it might be, athletic to keep, Kyler Murray safe when he's scrambling and stuff like that. I think it's a great pick here. I think they really need to increase the offensive line help, and there's a chance that they could lose DJ Humphries in free agency. So I think this pick makes a lot of sense here. On to number 9 with the Jags. I think they could use a lot of different things. Now, the defense is a huge need that needs to be addressed. Linebacker, corner, they obviously lost Jalen Ramsey. However, they do have another pick in this draft at some point. So I think they pick again Jags pick at 9 and 20. So I don't think that they need to make a pick here. Now, I'm proposing a trade down for them at this point, but that's just my personal opinion. I as I said, I'm making this mock draft without any trades so far, so I do want to take their pick here at number 9, and I think out of all the players, it's going to be Jerry Jeudy. All right, guys, so the reason I went with Jerry Jeudy at number 9 for the Jaguars is because he's a really, really fast receiver. He does everything really well in terms of run after the catch, route running, speed, just general awareness on the field as a receiver, knowing when his quarterback's scrambling, blah, blah, blah. I think he's a very dynamic guy. However, I don't know if his size will be an issue for him. I think he's more of an inside slot guy than he is a staple outside receiver. I think a similar career path for him would be, a Deshaun Jackson sans the injuries. I think he could have that level of a career. Which is great. I mean, he's, pairing him with DJ Chark, D.D. Westbrook. You don't necessarily need him to be the big-bodied contested catch guy. So I think it's a great addition for their offense here. They still obviously have to figure out the quarterback position a little bit, but that's for another video or whatever. Number 10 here with the Cleveland Browns. I think they definitely need offensive line help a lot. I think Baker Mayfield is under way too much pressure, and I think his instinct when he gets under pressure really fast is to just scream and run out of the pocket and make errant throws, and that's why he gets a lot of turnovers. So I think if he feels more comfortable in the pocket, it'll help his game a lot, and that's exactly why I have Andrew Thomas going here. Mekhi Becton has really risen lately in the mocks, and I think that's purely based on his athletic profile. I think he's a very athletic guy. However, I think Andrew Thomas is more your stereotypical anchor left tackle. Protect the blind side. He's a big guy, can really move. Was a long-time starter at Georgia. Went back to the school last year when people thought he could have entered the draft last year, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, he's a great player. I think he's going to really help solidify that offensive line for them and help Baker Mayfield. So I've got number 11 here with the Jets. It's an interesting pick because they definitely need a lot of offensive line help. That's for sure. But I think there's enough free agency offensive tackles. You've got guys like Jack Conklin entering free agency and stuff like that. I think they could land their offensive linemen in free agency So that being said, with Robbie Anderson entering free agency and just not having great production in the last couple of years, I think they replace him with a guy like CeeDee Lamb, big receiver, really good at contesting the catch, had a great, college resume, played with some fantastic quarterbacks. I think he goes there with Sam Darnold. I think he really shines. Give Sam Darnold another weapon in that offense. Pair him with Le'Veon Bell. You get a dangerous ground and air game. I think it works at this pick. I like it a lot. And then we have the Raiders here at number 12. Obviously, their number one need is wide receiver. Now, you have the emergence of Darren Waller this season at tight end, which is fantastic. You saw a little bit of Hunter Renfrow and what he can bring to the table for this team. But they don't have that number one deep threat that can really push the ball downfield. Obviously, Derek Carr isn't necessarily that kind of quarterback. He really likes his checkdowns, his short throws, and stuff like that. Hence, a Darren Waller emergence. Hence, the use of a guy like Hunter Renfrow. But I think they get a speedy guy here out of Alabama. They're going with Henry Ruggs. I like it a lot. He's an absolute burner. I think he's got a little bit to work on in his game, but you really can't teach speed. This guy's going to run a 4.25, 4.27. The guy burns. So I think it adds another dynamic to this offense that they don't think, Josh Jacobs is a power running back. You've got the short-term game solidified with Waller and Renfrow. I think they need a field stretcher, a guy who can really force defenses on their heels. I think Henry Ruggs is that guy for them. So number 13 here, I've got the Indianapolis Colts. I just did a rebuild for the Colts. In case you guys haven't seen that yet, go check it out. I just put it up. I'm recording this on Friday. It went up at 9 a.m. Eastern today, so go check that out. But I'm here with the Colts. Obviously, with the implications of the whole Andrew Luck situation, you could definitely look quarterback here. We've got guys like Jordan Love. We've got guys like Jake Fromm. So, I don't know if this is really the pick for me where I would see them taking a quarterback. They still have Jacoby Brissett under contract. I think the need that they desperately have to resolve is the interior defensive line. I think your offense is probably good for another year. You still have a very young Marlon Mack. T.Y. Hilton, if he can have an injury-free season to an extent, he can be really effective again. I think you really need to address the defense, and especially that interior offensive line. Interior defensive line. It was a pretty big issue for them, and then when you look at their roster, they just have really, really old interior defensive linemen. I'm talking about guys like Danico Autry, Margus Hunt, who's, those guys are respectively like 32 and 34. Like, those are way too old. You need to revamp the interior of your defensive line. And I think the guy who makes the most sense here is Javon Kinlaw. He's an athletic interior defensive lineman. He's very dissimilar, in my opinion, to a guy like Derek Brown. Derek Brown is very good at stopping the run. I think a guy like Javon Kinlaw is a guy who can stop the run, but also force quarterbacks out of their comfort level by pushing the interior offensive linemen back into their lap, which helps with your edge rushers and all that stuff. So I think it's a great selection here. You get a young, athletic guy in there to really revamp that interior defensive line. Now, the Bucs at 14 are an interesting pick here because I would have also said that their biggest need would have been interior defensive line. Now, you could make the argument for quarterback. I can see with Jameis Winston being the way he is and, can lead the league in total yards, but then also throw like 15-plus interceptions. I don't think that's the direction that they're going to go here. I think the pick that makes the most sense for them is offensive line, and that's why I have them taking an athletic guy in Tristan Wirfs here out of Iowa. Their offensive line is fairly good as it is right now. However, you're getting guys into free agency. I think it makes a lot of sense here. If you're going to continue with the Jameis experiment, you might as well give him a confident tackle that he knows he can trust, and he can sit in the pocket a little bit more, make better decisions. So I think that's the pick that makes the most amount of sense for them. Broncos at number 15. Now, I have a bit of an interesting pick here at number 15 for the Broncos. I think this is an beyond obvious trade back opportunity for them because I think genuinely their biggest need here is receiver. And the reason I say that, you lost Emmanuel Sanders at the trade deadline to the 49ers, which is fine. He was an expiring old guy, and I think they made the right decision moving him to the 49ers. Courtland Sutton is your staple receiver. He really showed out after Emmanuel Sanders left. However, behind him, you really only have Deshaun Hamilton for the most part as your other notable receivers. I think you need to add another dynamic to this offense. I think Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman in the backfield are great. You've kind of got a little bit of speed plus power. Drew Lock coming into another season here. Do I think they can improve the offensive line? Absolutely. However, I think they'll probably do that down the end of the line of the draft if they don't trade back here. But I think at pick 15, you've got to add another dynamic to your offense. And I'm going down the board here, and I'm going to pick Laviska Shenault out of Colorado. Really, really dynamic player. You can do him on end arounds. He's really good out of the slot, speedy guy. If we want to check out his profile here, it'll pop up, which is another great feature that this site has. You can see that, all of his stats and stuff like that, a little bit of background on, all their analytics from him and stuff like that. So it's really great to see, but he's 6'2", 220, but he plays like a slot receiver. It's very interesting. He's a big enough guy that you could argue he could be a contested catch receiver, and I think that's a dynamic of his game that he'll look to add in the NFL, but he really is like a very Swiss Army knife kind of guy for Colorado, so I look forward to seeing if the Broncos will draft him here, what they can do to incorporate him into the offense, but I think it's a really fun pick, and it makes sense for them, but I do also think they could trade down in this scenario and potentially get a receiver similar, maybe a little bit less talented than Laviska in, the second, maybe even the third round. This receiver class is very, very deep. So number 16 with the Atlanta Falcons here. A big problem that the Atlanta Falcons have run into is that they can't get a lot of pressure on opposing quarterbacks. And the reason for that is because Vic Beasley had one amazing season where he's, had like double-digit sacks and led the league and stuff like that. However, he's really fallen off in recent years, and I believe they gave him a pretty decent contract, so that kind of stings a little bit, but I think they really need to revamp this edge rushing group that they have, and I think they get a guy like K'Lavon Chaisson. It makes a lot of sense here. I'm just referring to my draft here. I want to make sure I get these picks right. Just a guy that can get after the quarterback, purely for that reason. You could argue that A.J. Epineza from Iowa is a better player or would go higher than K'Lavon Chaisson. But I think, LSU, he's got more of an athletic profile, maybe a little bit of more experience in those big games than a guy like A.J. Epineza with Iowa and stuff like that. I don't know what factor that plays in, but, we'll see how he does in the combine. I think he's a great player. I think he's even a guy who could rise a little bit in this draft because there's so much attention on how good Chase Young is that maybe we're, kind of devaluing the other edge rushers in this draft. But I think he's a great player, and I think he goes to Atlanta here at 16. Dallas. Dallas is a very interesting situation. Obviously, you've got the whole Amari Cooper, Dak Prescott free agency, that kind of thing. That has a huge factor on what they end up doing in this upcoming draft. I think a very realistic thing that could take place is that they're going to have to let Byron Jones go in free agency if they want to make sure that this offensive core stays the same. So I think what makes the most sense here is getting a Byron Jones replacement. Now, it's obviously really difficult to replace a guy who's, been very solid at the NFL level. It's not easy to come by corners who really have that effect on the game, but I think a guy like Kristian Fulton here is a great selection for them. Obviously, struggled a little bit in the championship game for LSU, but, I think overall his tape last year was significantly better than this year. I think he got overshadowed by Derek Stingley a little bit with him coming into the program as a freshman, probably one of the highest touted cornerback underclassmen in a long time. So, I think Kristian Fulton can bounce back at the NFL level. I think he'll get back to more his game. And yeah, I think that's a great selection for them. It kind of immediately fills a hole, addition by subtraction kind of thing. So we're back to the Dolphins here at number 18. Now, I think this is a no-brainer selection here for them. It's going to be Mekhi Becton. And I have a feeling some people would have assumed that I would have said A.J. Epineza because they do desperately need an edge rusher. However, the reason why I'm choosing Mekhi Becton here for them is because he's a very athletic tackle, and they do desperately need offensive tackle. However, I've found that if you give an offensive tackle at least 1 year in the NFL to develop, to understand the game a little bit better, blah, 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 get some experience, and then you throw your franchise quarterback behind him, I think it's better than the reverse scenario where you already have the quarterback and then you try and find a tackle for him. So I think this really works for them. You give Becton a year with Fitzmagic, you see how he does, and then you can throw Tua in there behind him confidently after he's had a season under his belt. So I think that really works for them here. All right, guys, so we're back here with the Raiders at pick 19. They went with Henry Ruggs with their first pick at number 12. I think they go defense on this selection here. I think it's a cornerback, and I think it's going to be C.J. Henderson out of Florida. Now, I think he's, for the most part, risen up some boards. Now, you could make the argument that linebacker's a bigger need here. However, I don't know if Kenneth Murray and Patrick Queen from LSU are guys that are top 20 picks in terms of talent. So I think they go corner here. I know that they've had their struggles trying to figure out their corners. Their corners got hurt a lot this year. So I think you throw in C.J. Henderson back there. He's a great player. And yeah, I think it just works. I think you try and upgrade that secondary as much as you can. Number 20 here, we are back with the Jags. Obviously with Telvin Smith and all that stuff going around his year off and his mental health and stuff like that, I personally think it's a great thing that an NFL player can step away from the game to focus on his mental health. I think it's an encouraging sign for, what's to come with the discussion and the stigma around mental health and stuff like that. But it definitely left a huge hole in their defense for obvious reasons. I mean, Myles Jack just can't do everything. So I think they desperately need to add linebacker. Telvin Smith will potentially come back at some point. Maybe he doesn't. He is approaching 30 pretty quickly. So I think it's a position you already need to consider for a replacement. And I think they go out and they get a guy like Patrick Queen from LSU. I just want to make sure that that's the pick I'm going with. It is. I think after the national championship game, people really started to notice how good his game was. Yeah, I think he's a great player. I think he's, he's rangy, but I do believe that his best quality is his run-stopping ability, dictate the middle of the field, command a defense. He's a leadership type kind of guy. He's your captain in the huddle and stuff like that. So I think it's a great pick here. Number 21, I have the Eagles. This is an interesting pick for me. Now, everyone is so focused on corners and receivers for the Eagles, and rightfully so. I mean, it was fairly evident that those two things were the biggest gaps in this team's success. I mean, they just couldn't pass the ball once Deshaun Jackson went down, and, that caused a whole spillover of trying to get Arcega-Whiteside going, and that was a frustrating thing to see. And then obviously with the corner situation, having inconsistent play, basically. It's a very frustrating thing. It's a really frustrating thing to watch. But so I actually have the Eagles going safety here. And the reason for that is because Malcolm Jenkins, he's still a great player, but he's super old now. He just isn't the same guy as what he once was. So I think it makes sense you get his replacement here and now. I think you can still get receivers deep into this class, and I don't think it's a situation where you need to panic and pull the trigger on a first-round receiver, mainly because I just genuinely believe that there's only two guys that are really worth a first-round pick, and then you could argue the rest of them where they should go, but I think they go out and get a guy like Xavier McKinney here from Alabama. I think it's just it's the pick that makes the most amount of sense. You get an instant replacement. You can move on from Malcolm Jenkins. I know he's been a staple of your defense for a long time, but it just makes sense for me here. Number 22, we're looking at the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills are a very interesting team, in my opinion. I think they're one of the most exciting young teams in the league, and by that I mean they have a lot of core pieces, a lot of very important aspects of their team that are young in the right places. They've got a young quarterback, they've got a young running back, they've got a young middle linebacker, a young corner on the outside in Trey White. I mean, they've got a lot of really good young players, and, maybe another year of development is their answer, but what they don't have is young edge rushers. Jerry Hughes is very old, obviously. He's been in the league for a while now. He's, I think, approaching 34 years old, so I think you need to get the next guy up for him, and that guy's going to be A.J. Epineza. Really strong, more powerful guy than a finesse guy. Off the edge out of Iowa. I like his game. It's gritty. It seems like he seems like a Buffalo player to me. So I think it works here. I think they take him at number 22. We have the Patriots at number 23 in a very similar situation as the Bills. They don't have very good edge rushers. Now, their linebacking core of Deontay Hightower and Kyle Van Noy and stuff like that, that's all good and fine, but Kyle Van Noy is becoming a free agent this offseason and stuff like that. I think they need an edge rusher to come in for them, kind of revamp this defense a little bit, maybe get some pressure on quarterbacks, make their lives easier for the secondary, even though the secondary doesn't really need that much help because it's so good. But it's Yetur Gross-Matos here. I recently thought a guy like Yetur Gross-Matos would fall out of the first round, but he's kind of consistently staying there in the back half of the first, so I'm comfortable here taking him with the Patriots at 23. Now we've got the Saints at number 24. It's one of those. It's one of those teams where you kind of look at it and you're like, okay, well, there's clearly an issue with their linebacking core. They could use a lot of help there. They've got Drew Brees. What's the questions with him, surrounding him and Teddy Bridgewater, Taysom Hill, all those guys. However, I think the thing that makes the most amount of sense to them is that if Drew Brees returns, you get him another weapon. You've got Michael Thomas. That's fantastic. He's an unbelievable receiver, quite possibly unguardable like his Instagram would lead us to believe. However, there's not really another guy. You've got Tre'Quan Smith, which is, he's a fine piece to have, but he's not another staple number 2. And then Kamara out of the backfield, he had a bit of a down season. He obviously was hurt for a little bit, and it was confusing with Breeze and stuff like that, and not having the safety cushion of a guy like Mark Ingram. But I think they get another weapon for this offense, and I think it's going to be a guy like Jalen Reagor. Now, I have to go down my board here a little bit, but here he is at number 43. We're going to look at his profile here a little bit as well, but he's out of TCU. He's a really, really interesting player. 5'11", 195, not the biggest guy, but he's blazing fast. I think he's had some struggles with catching the football, but he's one of those guys where it's very similar to a Laviska Shenault. Like, Laviska's bigger than he is, but Laviska got used in that end-around screen game a lot. I think Jalen Reagor brings a lot of that to the table as well. Just a dynamic guy that you can use in a bunch of different ways, innovative ways that I think it works really well for New Orleans. They're obviously one of the teams that likes to pull out a bunch of interesting concepts and show a bunch of looks to defenses. I think Jalen Reagor comes in and he gives a different dynamic to this offense. Number 25, the Minnesota Vikings. Now, originally, I really didn't like making this pick, and the reason you'll see in a second, but I didn't know if it was because of the storyline or if it was because of the talent, and that's a big part of the NFL draft. People love storylines. People don't always love looking at talent and assessing it and seeing where the best fits on what team are. But people like storylines. It's really easy to say, hey, the Minnesota Vikings already have Stephon Diggs. Why don't they add his brother in Trayvon Diggs out of Alabama? And that's what I have mocked here. Do I think it's a great pick? I think it's a good pick. I just want to go to the corners here. I don't know where he is, so we're going to find him here. I think he's fallen quite a significant amount on this board in terms of the last, month or two, but guys like Damon Arnett and Jeff Gladney have kind of, vaulted over him in most people's mocks, but I think he's still a great player. You just can't really get rid of that Alabama culture of football. I think he's going to be a hard worker when he gets there. I think the storyline of him and his brother and stuff like that, it just works for me. I think it'll make him work harder and stuff like that. So they might end up going a different way here and getting a better corner. I still think they desperately need corner. They have a problem with Xavier Rhodes and stuff like that. And then they ended up moving one of their safeties to the Seahawks. So they definitely need secondary help. So I think a corner is the pick here. It's just whether or not they go with the storyline of Trayvon Diggs or not. Third pick for the Miami Dolphins here. I have them going running back, and there's a reason for that, and it's because did you watch the Miami Dolphins running game this year? It was terrible. Now, I'm pretty certain Ryan Fitzpatrick, a 30-plus-year-old man, maybe even 35 years old plus, led the team in rushing this year. It was terrible. They can't continue with the same collection of running backs as they did last year. They had Kalen Ballage, and he had some issues with the laws and stuff like that. It's a mess. It's just an absolute mess in that backfield. I think you need a guy who can come in, be a bell cow, absolutely command the backfield, and then you can put complementary pieces around him. Now, do I think DeAndre Swift is the best running back in this class? I actually don't, and there's a reason for that, and it's because J.K. Dobbins is just so good. In my opinion, J.K. Dobbins is better. I think he broke the record for the most amount of broken tackles in a season in NCAA college history this year. He makes people miss. He makes guys, run around like they have no idea what they're even doing on the defensive side of the ball. But DeAndre Swift is going to be the pick here. I think overall he's the more complete running back out of the backfield. He can run between the tackles. He can catch the ball outside. I think he's just a little bit more dynamic. However, I do personally think Dobbins is a better running back. But the Miami Dolphins take Swift here at 26. On to the Seahawks. The big question for the Seattle Seahawks in this offseason is going to be re-signing Jadeveon Clowney. Now, their number one team need, according to this website, is edge. And I don't disagree. Jadeveon Clowney re-signing is a huge help to their edge position. But, they still need another one on the other side. However, I'm not going that direction with them whatsoever. And the reason for that is because I am a huge Russell Wilson fan. I think he's totally undervalued in the NFL in this day and age. He should be in the conversations with guys like Aaron Rodgers, Ben Roethlisberger in terms of, franchise quarterbacks, superior quarterbacks that are going to be in the NFL Hall of Fame at some point. But he's just never really mentioned in the same breath as some of those guys. And it really irks me because he's been unbelievable for so long. And boy, does he need help on the offensive line. It has just been a classic Seattle Seahawks problem for a while now. You could argue that when they were making championship runs, it was anchored around their defense, and Russell Wilson was just, kind of a cog in that machine and needed to score points for them. But I think at this point, he's got a lot of great pieces around him. Chris Carson's a fantastic running back. And then, Rashad Penny's a good complementary piece in the backfield. You've got the emergence of DK Metcalf. You've got the emergence of Tyler Lockett. I think this offense could be so dangerous. You've got guys like Will Dissly, who's going to be coming back off injury. A potential position that they may need to address being tight end. But I think they go offensive line here. I think they get a tackle. It's going to be Josh Jones here. Their offensive line is fairly old. I think they still have Germain Ifedi there and stuff like that. They just really need a revamping on the offensive line. I'm sick and tired of watching Russell Wilson scramble and run for his life and then make unbelievable throws like the one he made to Tyler Lockett this season in the corner of the end zone. But I think they get a guy, Josh Jones here out of Houston, very strong offensive tackle, 6'5", 311, just a big dude. Sorry, I didn't mean to click on Neville Gallimore, but I think he needs work. I think he needs, for being such a big guy, I think he can move a little bit better than, maybe dropping a couple LBs and getting some better movement in his feet is probably priority number one, especially being in front of a scrambling quarterback like Russell Wilson. But I think it makes a lot of sense here. I think it's the logical pick for them. And yeah, on to number 28. We have the Baltimore Ravens here. Now, it's interesting. They have wide receiver as the number one need for this Ravens team, and I don't necessarily disagree because, Hollywood Brown, as we saw over the course of his rookie season, he's electric and great and all that stuff, but he does come with injury concerns. And then, you've got guys like Willie Snead, who's been a bit of a journeyman over the course of his career. You have guys like Mark Andrews stepping up into a bigger role in the offense. But I don't think that's what this team needs. I think they need a linebacker to shore up their defense. I don't think they've ever really recovered from the loss of Ray Lewis, which, that sounds ridiculous. Can any team really recover from a guy like Ray Lewis? He's an all-defensive player, across the board, Hall of Famer, blah, blah, blah. It's hard to replace guys like that, but I don't think they've found that guy yet and an anchor to their linebacking core. They also traded away a young linebacker when they decided to bring in Marcus Peters this season. So I think they go linebacker here. I think it's the pick that makes the most amount of sense. It's going to be Kenneth Murray. He's a great linebacker out of Oklahoma. He kind of comes with a little bit of injury concern, but he's very athletic, 6'2", 234 pounds. He's a good run defender. I don't know if his game's really refined in pass coverage and stuff like that, but those are the stuff that he can work on at the NFL level. I think he's very athletic, very aggressive, and I think it makes a lot of sense here for them. Number 29, we have the Titans. Now, this is actually one of probably my most exciting picks in the first round. Do I think it's a very real chance he will end up going the first round? Absolutely, I think he do. I think he could be, if he figures out his health and stuff like that, he could be potentially one of the better players to ever come out of this draft class. And that guy is going to be Terrell Lewis out of Alabama. Tennessee desperately needs an edge rusher for sure. And just general improvements on the defense. Clearly their offense became very dynamic all of a sudden. But I think where they struggle is getting after the quarterback. So I think they bring in a guy like Terrell Lewis, freakishly athletic, very solid player at Alabama. He just has some health concerns with him. So if he can manage to figure out those, I think he could be one of the best players in this whole draft class. And that's, a great pick at number 29 for the Titans. Number 30 with the Green Bay Packers. So after finally bringing in some free agency talent and stuff like that, I think their defense was much improved. I think it could use some help still. However, we're going to turn to the offensive side of the ball. Aaron Rodgers is clearly not exactly the same quarterback as what he once was. I think Davante Adams is a great piece, and I think Aaron Jones is a great piece, but who is around them to help them? I don't like Geronimo Allison. I don't like waiting on MVS to try and break out. Jake Kumro was a guy who saw play time this year at the receiver position and stuff like that, who I think Aaron Rodgers is actually pretty high on, so we might see an increased role for him this upcoming season. But I think they do go receiver. This might change drastically if they can't re-sign Bakhtiari at offensive tackle, because then that becomes a massive hole and a huge need for them. But I think they go wide receiver, and I think they get Justin Jefferson here at LSU. Now, the reason why I think Justin Jefferson works is because he's that big contested catch guy. Great athleticism, 6'3", 192, can absolutely fly, and he's a great deep threat, but he can also get that contested ball in the end zone. And Green Bay's infamous for being one of those teams that likes to pass a lot in the red zone, so it makes a lot of sense to get a guy who can go up, get a ball, and come down with it and have it not be Davante Adams, because that seems to be the only answer to this team. Number 31, the reigning Super Bowl losers, the 49ers. Now, I said that with a little bit of, I don't actually have anything against the 49ers, but it's kind of funny with Shanahan losing 2 Super Bowls, but sorry, anyways, back to the mock draft. Pick number 31. I think they desperately need some help in their secondary. Now, it was pretty obvious to me that Richard Sherman has lost a step in the Super Bowl. I watched him throughout the season, and he actually played pretty well throughout the season, but I think he really got exposed with the speed that Kansas City brings to the table, and that's going to be a theme that's going to be consistent throughout the next couple years of the NFL. Like, speed is going to dictate this game, and I just think Richard Sherman's lost a step. However, there aren't really a whole lot of guys that I think are worthy of a first-round selection. Obviously, this is like the back end of the first round. You could argue that we're already into guys with second-round talent, but I think that they desperately need to resolve some issues in the secondary. I don't know if getting a corner is really the right call here, but I think you get best player available here. He's in a position of need that you could exploit, and that could be exploited by other teams. And I think it's Grant Delpit from LSU. Very athletic, very good player, but definitely had concerns coming into the season with tackling and stuff like that, and it really kind of came to a head during the course of the season. His His tape last year was significantly better than his tape this year. However, I still think he's got that player within him that he had the prior season. So shore up some of those defensive tackling concerns and stuff like that, and I think he's going to be a great pick there, potentially replacing guys like Jaquiski Tart back there at the safety position. And finally, the final pick of the first round, your Super Bowl champion, Kansas City Chiefs here. I think realistically, if I'm the Kansas City Chiefs, I look for a trade down option here. You could also make the argument here for running back. You've still got guys like Jonathan Taylor, J.K. Dobbins on the board, not to mention their endless carousel of guys like Shady McCoy and Damian Williams and all that stuff after losing Kareem Hunt. So you could make the argument for running back. I actually don't think that would be a bad call here. However, I'm going to go with a cornerback. Kendall Fuller is going to be a free agent this offseason. Tyrann Mathieu getting older. I think this secondary could see some regression. So I think Damon Arnette is a great pick here. He's out of Ohio State. Now, I actually didn't know a lot about Arnette, until very recently. He's been a guy that's been rising up really quickly on board. So I think he's a great player. I think he helps in kind of that slot role if they want to play him there instead of Kendall Fuller. But that's just my personal opinion on the player. This mock draft is going to be changed around a bunch. I'll probably even end up releasing one going into the second round, maybe even the third round. I don't know yet, but that'll probably be coming closer to the draft after free agency stuff has started to happen. Today we just got the news that Josh Norman's going to get released from the Redskins, which doesn't really change a whole lot. I mean, maybe they look Jeffrey Okuda's way now as a replacement for him, but anyways, just interesting stuff's going to happen. More players are going to move positions, move teams, and stuff like that. So, this is definitely not set in stone or anything like that, but this is just how I would mock out my first mock draft of the year. Yeah, so this is just my first mock draft, guys. A lot of things are going to change still with free agency, blah, blah, blah. So, don't hold me to this. I will likely release another one probably in maybe a month or so, maybe a couple weeks. And then, we'll see what the board looks like then. If you guys have any issues with maybe, with a player that I took for your team, or maybe you're looking to see a player go to a particular team and you're not exactly happy where I put him, or maybe someone didn't make it into the first round you thought would make it into the first round, let me know in the comments. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. Yeah, let me know if you guys want more content like this. It would be great to see a lot of support for a video like this. It's not something I'm used to doing. I'm used to just kind of sticking to Madden and stuff like that. So I'm giving my personal opinions on the upcoming draft. So this is what it looks like. And yeah, if you guys liked it, let me know. And I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.